The standout finding of resilience and well-being science is that nobody goes it well alone. That, other people matter, as the legendary psychologist Chris Peterson once said. So, yes, it lies within you, but it also lies between you. That the more connected you are, the better supported you are, the more realistic your conversations can be, the better you are at asking for help and getting the specific help you need, the more resilient you are over the long haul. But
Hi, I'm Cian Xiao.
And I'm Sammy Winemaker. We talk about ways to put the human back at the center of care.
The Waiting Room Revolution starts right now. Welcome to the Waiting Room Revolution. Today we are excited to welcome Dr. Lucy Hone, who is a resilience researcher from New Zealand. She's a TED speaker, a best-selling author of the book Resilient Grieving, and her work has helped people navigate grief, loss, and adversity. So welcome to the podcast, Lucy.
Cien and everybody listening, thank you for inviting me to share my work with you. I have so much respect for the work you do and the Waiting Room Revolution. I'm on board.
Amazing. I mean, I want to share with everyone, I was so impressed because I met you in Toronto at the Hospice Palliative Care Ontario conference. You were the keynote speaker. It was a packed room, standing room only. There must have been over 1,000 people, and everybody was so engaged. And I think from the very first question that you asked people, I quickly realized that I had always thought of grief as something that's connected with dying, and I think I've known enough to know that grief can happen before a death and bereavement happens after. But from your talk, I realized it's much broader and that grief can happen in many different forms. So I'm curious if you're open to sharing the, what you ask, how you start your talks and what you sort of ask people to help them understand that grief affects us all.
Thank you. Yes, and actually, this in my own story, we all have a story, don't we? And how it came upon me to understand that grief can be associated with so many other life events and transitions beyond death and dying was living. So I'm a Londoner, but I live in Otatahi, Christchurch, New Zealand. And in 2011, we had a massive earthquake here in February, devastating earthquake that killed 195 people. Um, and then on from that, we had five major aftershocks and 10,000, minor aftershocks. And so I ended up working with the civil defense and emergency management response teams. And it was one of them one day. I remember talking to her and saying, I don't understand why I'm feeling so sad because I didn't lose anyone. And unlike most of my friends and colleagues, we didn't lose our home. We were one of the lucky ones. So I said to her, why do I feel so sad? And it was her who said to me, you can dream, you don't have to lose someone, you can lose something. And I think that was a really pivotal turning point in my life for me to realize that there is a grief response that is attached to so many other losses in our lives. And so I start my TED talk and any really big keynote presentation by driving this point home by asking people to stand up or raise their hand if standing's not available to them. So just to basically make this move, if you've ever lost someone you truly love, or if you've ever had your heart broken, if you've lived through some kind of relationship breakdown, a chronic illness, so many miscarriage, infidelity, abortion, bullying, job loss. And I basically rattled through a long, pretty hideous list of all of the terrible things that can happen to us in lives. And as you and I and everybody listening knows, do happen to us in our lives. And within a few moments really within that first 90 seconds of my presentation, it becomes really clear to everybody in the room that adversity doesn't discriminate. That if you are alive, then you either have already had to or you're going to have to cope with some kind of loss. And it's a very powerful way of driving that point home because I'm a researcher, CN, and so I know this from an empirical academic perspective. I know that 75% of adults will experience some form of potentially traumatic event in their lifetime. But seeing a room of 1,000 people standing in front of you, as you did that day, and people on when they watched my TED talk can see, it's quite different. It's quite different to just reading about it on the page, isn't it?
Yeah, and you've been studying, and we're going to learn all about your work and how we can manage or deal with some of that. But you didn't just study it. I mean, you also lived it, and it's personal. And if you're open to it, can share a little bit of that story and how your research, and those experiences, those personal experiences, have intertwined and affected each other.
Yes, and again, I don't think I'm particularly unique here. I think life has a funny way of playing out, doesn't it? But certainly there is an irony to my life story in that since 2008, I've been single-mindedly obsessed about why some people seem to cope with stressful life events and disruption, challenge, change, and loss better than others. And so I went to study my master's in resilience psychology at the University of Pennsylvania with Martin Seligman and all of those sort of positive psychology greats at the time. And I had only really just come back and embarked on my own doctoral thesis when, firstly, the earthquakes hit. So that kind of taught me an awful lot about my field. That took all of the resilience research that I'd learned about off the page, certainly. But then in 2014, we hit personal family tragedy. On an unexpected Saturday afternoon, we three families packed up our cars and were planning to go mountain biking on a 3-day adventure down in the beautiful South Island of New Zealand. And at the last minute, our gorgeous 12-year-old daughter hopped in the car with her best friend, Ella. And on the way down to the lodge that we were staying in, a car drove through a stop sign at 100 kilometers an hour and crashed into them and killed Ella, Abby, my daughter, and Ella's mum, Sally, who was a really good friend of mine. So my life, literally was kind of thrown, obviously completely decimated, and in that moment, and my life path that I had just was completely trashed. I think that was probably the best way to describe it. And so I did kind of find myself flung to the other side of the equation of, I'm used to helping other people. All of my work has been about supporting others. And suddenly here I was wondering if any of what I had learned would be useful. And then the kind of professional, academic writer in me woke up and challenged what we were told, I think, in the weeks and months after Abby died, and really made me challenge all of that and do this similar to what you guys have been doing, to build my own revolution, to say, you've all told me that I'm now a prime candidate for divorce, mental illness, and a family estrangement, not on my watch. And what can we do? And how useful is all of this training that I've had and all of this research that I've done when we apply it to the grief context? And so that has been my professional and personal life mission ever since. And it's 11 years now of doing that, doing what you're doing. And in my world, I think I'm growing grief literacy is really my mission that I'm on.
Hmm. Grief literacy, and this is connected to the public health palliative care
Mm,
international movement, which is I think uh started in UK as well, but has grown, and I sort of recently found that community and found a home there. But um your TED, you talk a lot about what can be done in your
mm,
TED talk. It's been viewed millions and millions of times. I know we will direct people to that in the show notes, but you talk about three things that I guess that you discovered that people who are more resilient that they practice these practices. Can you share a little bit about that?
yes, willingly. And then let's talk a bit afterwards, Cien, about how similar they are to your seven keys. I mean,
Yeah, I would
I
love that.
so can sense those similarities. So, in my TED talk, I wanted to distill everything that I've learned into three steps so that people have a kind of practical recipe for coping with tough times. So uh, they're not the only things you can do, I'd like to say at the beginning, but in all of my work in different contexts, this is seems to be the kind of fundamental patterns that I see, that when people are faced with a tough time and they manage to adapt in a healthy fashion, then they seem to be first step, they seem to be very good at somehow accepting that suffering and struggle is part of life. And I think why that is so important is firstly, it helps push back on the why me question.
Hmm.
So and in that way that my TED talk starts with everybody standing up if they've been through some potentially traumatic event, what we're doing is speaking to the fact that adversity is very universal, and I think this is important because for there are some deaths, particularly I've learned to understand that such as suicide, where the what if questions just keep on coming, and so that is a real additional struggle. But in many other situations, understanding that struggle and suffering happen to us all, really, if you know that deep in your bones, it does quash that feeling that you've been singled out and discriminated against. And so it does respond and push back on the why me question. And I think that's really critical for people, because it stops you from wallowing and makes you go, okay, this is shit happens essentially. What can I do to move on, move forward, find a path through this? I also think that understanding that suffering and struggle are part of life is critical, because we live in an era of perfectionism,
Hmm.
particularly in healthcare. So, for so many of your healthcare workers, professionals who will be listening, I see this across healthcare systems, that particularly at that surgeon level, the higher and the hierarchies, the perfectionism is so rife that it creates psychological lack of psychological safety, and makes it really tough for people to experience any psychological health if you are operating out of that perfectionist mindset. So that's the first of these steps. The second is that when people are typically operating out of a resilient mindset, they have somehow they've managed, or they do manage, to focus, to be really selective over where they focus their attention. So they are typically able to focus their attention on the things that they can change and somehow accept the things that they can't change. And I will never say that's easy. I know how easy it is to say it and how hard it is to do it. But I also know, as an academic researcher, from all of the studies, that this is a really foundational form of mental agility that is strongly associated with our ability to cope when we are faced with unwanted change and unwanted um, stressful life events. So that mental agility involves us managing to question our thoughts for accuracy, notice where we're focusing our attention. Are we only looking at the downside, the negative, the what we can't do, where we're missing out, who hasn't been to help us? It plays out on so many different levels that I see in your work all the time. Um, and then the third of these three steps comes from cognitive behavioral therapy and encourages people to ask themselves, is what I'm doing right now, the way I'm choosing to think, act, or be, helping or harming me in my quest to get through this? And what I love about this question is its incredible flexibility. So you can change the is what I'm doing, having this extra glass of wine, um, impacting my, is it helping or harming me in my quest to get up in the morning and present or do whatever it is? But equally, is having this conversation using this tone of voice with my physician helping or harming me in my quest to maintain this relationship? And
Mm.
it's just so entirely adaptable. And like all of your work, Cien, I think at the root, at the heart of it, it puts people back in the driver's seat of their experience. And that is completely what everybody on this podcast is endeavoring to do.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I I want to just again direct people to the TED Talk because like you talk about that in more depth, and of course the book itself, which has all of this in detail. But I mean, even listening to it again, I'm thinking of different people, different situations where I could have reminded myself of those same things, and they're so simple and yet so powerful. And I guess, I'm curious to know what you think, but that is, my colleague Sammy Winemaker and me, our journey, which was trying to figure out how to support people. It started with end of life, but as we moved forward, we realized it was anyone with any sort of health condition or serious illness. But, people have told us it's more than just serious conditions. It's really any interaction with the system. And it is this reclaiming of the power imbalance where you have no answers and the system has all the answers. It's trying to figure out what you can do and what you can ask. And we always say information is power. And I
Yeah.
think the overlap with what you're doing with resilient grieving and these steps is really talking about focusing on the power you have to change your story and accepting the things you can't, sure, but there's a lot that we can do to be hopeful and prepared, is what how we say it in the context of serious illness.
I totally agree. I think that empowerment piece, the agency piece, is everything. And it's taken me a long time to realize that actually my work has two different aspects to it. One is that empowerment piece, that to really enable people to focus their attention on what they can do. And also, there's a lot of, in my work and in your work, getting people to take a strengths based approach. And that plays out in relationships, in questioning, in behavior, everything. So, that is one side. That agency piece is one part of my work, but it's taken me a lot longer to finally identify that the other part of my work, which is equally important, is the validation piece,
Mm,
and validating people's experiences, frustrations, their absolute hunger for hope and belief that they will some way somehow be able to find their own path through whatever it is that's going on for them. And those that validation, that people often say to me that reading my book was like having a big hug or a hot bath or something. It is that Oh, at last, there's somebody who gets me. And I understand that is what you are doing in your on your mission too. That is exactly what your revolution is about.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting you say that the validation piece. Yeah, I'm not sure we've ever really thought of it that way, but I could see how that would play out. And I remember having this burning question after you got off stage with the standing ovation about, um, as I was thinking about it, I think I could see how a lot of the principles applied after you've lost something. But I wondered how it would apply prospectively for people who are getting a diagnosis of a serious illness and maybe they feel like the loss is coming. It's in the
Mm,
future.
yeah,
Um, and and they're preparing for that, but they're also trying to avoid that. So I'm just
yeah.
curious through your work, your counseling, your courses, how has it mostly been people looking back to deal with a loss, or can it be used prospectively?
So I think they definitely can. I think you're doing a better job of that than I am because most of my work has been focused previously on death bereavement. But it's been really interesting for me because over the last couple of years, I did start to realize that we were turning people away from our courses. And because they were either anticipating a loss or they were experiencing some kind of living loss, is what I call them. And so just this last year, I've written a new book on living losses because people kept coming to me and emailing me and asking me for, have you got any resources? I'm living with some kind of, my partner has dementia, or we've just broken up in, a long-term relationship, and so many living with cancer, so many different kinds of living losses that eventually I thought, okay, this is just ridiculous. I can't keep giving people my death bereavement book, Resilient Grieving. I need to write them a new book. So this new book is called How Will I Ever Get Through This? And it revolves around 20 questions, the first 10 of which are the questions that people ask me when they are typically, going through some tough time. And I'm not going to go into the details of that now. I'm going to answer your question, which is yes, it just has made me realize that so much of my work does relate to people who are anticipating a loss or living with a chronic loss, because so much of my work is about choosing where you focus your attention. Um, that self awareness piece, self compassion about lowering the bar and doing what you can and being kind to yourself and those in your support team who maybe aren't traveling the same path or they're traveling the same path but not in the same way as you.
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, and self-regulation. How do we help ourselves cope in these really toughest of life moments? So it's been, yeah, fascinating for me to realize the resonance of my work with that sense of loss and life transition much more broadly.
Yeah. As you were talking about, the recognition and the um, people's self-awareness, I had a related question maybe, and that's covered in your 20 questions, but, we find that caregivers, for example, often put themselves behind the person with the illness, and they put their needs second or third or fourth and really focus all their energy on the patient because that person has the illness, not them. And in a way, that's a challenge, and we try to call that out and anticipating ripple effects and say that you're a team and your needs matter too. But I think it's still a big barrier, and I'm just curious um, how you've encountered that or what advice you have that people can uh, obviously they or not obviously, but you can validate their desire to want to support the patient, but they have to remind themselves that they're important too. And so that's another, it's a common challenge. I wonder if that comes up a lot when people are talking about supporting someone or a loss that might be coming.
I totally agree. It is definitely a very highly common challenge. I see that in my work. I've seen that in my family experiences and, friends and colleagues and clients all the time. It's hard not to lose yourself, isn't it, when you are a caregiver? And in fact, I presented probably 5 or 6 years ago with a colleague on this exact topic, and she had been a caregiver, and it wasn't until after her partner died that she really realised the impact that all of that effort and focus had on her. And so I think, to me, it is care for them, but don't lose yourself to
Hmm.
them, because that doesn't help anybody. And so I think it is really important to sort your support, is my phrase. And, that fits so well with all of your work, doesn't it, Cian? Um, because, all those cliches, it's a marathon, not a sprint. We need to be there for each other. And the only way you can do your job is if you are mindful of keeping yourself going and taking those small breaks. And I do have found that that is where the question, is this helping or harming you, has been very powerful for some of my clients, because they have realized that completely losing themselves and their sense of self to this illness, to their person that they are supporting, has had and can have damaging consequences over the long term. So it's tough, though. It's human nature, isn't it, to care for those that we love, and so often to take a back seat ourselves. But you can't do this without looking after yourself. So I definitely urge people to find that balance. And one of the simple ways I suggest to clients that they do that is to, take a fresh page in your notebook and write down everything that you've been doing this week, the long list, the absolute brain dump, and then in two different colors, kind of just circle those to say which of these are for you and which are for everybody else. And then try and just look at that and sit with that and realize that that is not sustainable. And so to look at the following week of how could you add in just one more thing each day, just a 5 minute window of sitting with your face in the sun, whatever it is, just a moment to maybe get out your daily calm app and do one of those daily moves, just to give yourself some kind of top up into your psychological, emotional, physical, spiritual piggy bank while you are walking this road, because it's so vitally important.
Hmm. I love that. I, I can think of people who I was like, oh, they should do that, and I'm like, wait, I need to do that
We all
myself
need to do
because
that.
it affects us all, right? Um, and yeah, I'm just thinking. I have so many questions. One of which is, you were talking about um I've heard, especially with conditions like, well, even cancer, but a dementia one especially, that the illness is like a whole series of losses, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
losing your mobility, your memory, your independence, your relationships. I mean, it can be depressing. And so I'm thinking, I'm kind of listening, thinking of the three steps you take, and you keep doing that, but it must be hard to try to keep finding the positive. I don't even know if it's the positive, but the actions that you can take while also recognizing the sheer amount of losses that could be coming up, and how you help your clients to like accept and grieve the life that they had and the one that they're embarking on, but also knowing that that's going to be continually changing and maybe changing for the worse or progressing in one direction. Um,
yeah.
That's sort of
You're
the
so
living
true.
loss book that you've just written, that I'll also check out. But what advice do you have there, or how do you, because it's not just a one-time thing.
I think these ambiguous losses, as Pauline Boss called them, are particularly challenging. You know, when someone is physically there but not emotionally there any longer or cognitively there. I should say my brother got FTD, frontal temporal dementia, at 50 and has died of pneumonia in during COVID. So I while he lived on the other side of the world and I only saw him once a year, so I didn't live that loss in the same way that my sister-in-law and her family did. Um, I, have some experience of it, as you say so rightly, those continual living losses. And I'd add to that that they are hidden or invisible losses. Grief is the term I would use because other people don't see them. And I remember spending time with my brother when he'd just been told that he couldn't drive any longer. And there was
Mm,
no doubt that he shouldn't be driving. But for him to lose that independence when he had dementia, so he didn't understand why. I remember the frustrations so much, actually, that the living with the frustrations, the having to be everybody around him having to be tolerant to his own frustration. So yeah, those kind of living losses, those ambiguous losses are so hard. And so I think you do need an incredible dose of empathy and compassion, and yeah, self-awareness, self-compassion to find your path through that. Because as you say, there are just a myriad of some small, some seismic losses, but it's also living with the uncertainty of it, not knowing, because everybody, as you know, and everybody listening knows, the from diagnosis, your prognosis can just be so varied. So I know that finding your community in those times, I think that I talk a lot about sorting your support. I think is absolutely vital so that you have got people who are um, in New Zealand, we would say in the same waka as you, the same boat as you. Even if they're on different journeys, just having people that goes back to the validation piece that I was talking about earlier on. And I see this when we run our online courses that people think they are coming to listen to me, but actually, once they're in a breakout room with people who are experiencing some kind of similar loss to them, then the validation of hearing other people going through and experiencing some kind of similar themes to you is incredibly validating and powerful, I think. So, the other thing that this comes from Pauline Boss's work on ambiguous loss. I think when you are facing so much uncertainty, we encourage people to find what she called your islands of certainty. And I write about those in the new book coming out next year. And those can be people who are your islands of certainty, people that you can turn to who give you that sense that you can just let your guard down,
mm,
or that you feel safe with them. They can be practices, they can be places, they can be possessions, your talisman of a ring or a necklace or wearing your partner's jersey. So I think of thinking of those four P's of people, places, practices, and even possessions can be really helpful because when we are facing so many levels of uncertainty, the fear and anxiety that comes with that can be really at least ameliorated by having building up the things that you can rely on. What is still true? What can we still do, even though we are living within these terrible limitations? And I would also encourage people to draw upon Ellen Langer's work in mindfulness here, and keep asking yourself, what is new and different here in this minute, in this hour, in this day? What, don't just think of this, is a bit like your zoom out, I think, in many ways. It's just, rather than getting fixated on thinking that this is the blanket prescription or a blanket prognosis, it's like, actually notice, do I ache a bit less in the morning? Do I function worse in the evening? What are the nuances here that I can really tune in on? And I think that can help people realize that it's not all black and white. There's so many different shades of gray in these journeys.
Yeah, I think, but in another way, I think I'm hearing you saying is that, it's easy to put things in a box, like I'm gonna die, or this is bad, or this is good. But yet, I think you're saying if we break it down into these moments, into these sort of splices of time, there's a lot of
Yeah, yeah,
points where we can, like you said, shades of gray, we can take agency, we can appreciate a silver lining or a another way to look at the situation, which helps us just to tune in to what's happening, to slow down a bit, to listen to what
yeah.
our body is saying, or what our mind is saying, what our feelings are saying. Yeah.
Mm,
I,
mm.
I'm so curious because you've probably been asked this one. I feel like this might be one of your most common questions, but I think many people struggle with if you're a friend or a support, an ally or a family member of someone who is dealing with a loss or facing a loss. What can we do and say that can actually be helpful without being cliche and just saying, "Oh, don't think about that," and time will heal all wounds, or whatever kind of cliche there's out there.
It is such a good question, and you're absolutely right. It is the question I get asked most, particularly when I work with corporates, with organisations. They want to know if they've got somebody. If they are grieving, they want to know, how do we do this right? Well, so sadly, of course, most people will probably already know that there is just no one right way. There's no yeah, there's just, it's one of those one size doesn't fit all. So I did some research a couple of years ago where I asked people in our community, what do you want people to say and what do you not want them to say? And honestly, I kind of laughed when I looked at these two lists, because I looked at them and just thought, oh, well, I almost can't do thematic analysis from this, because they are, what drives one person mad is what somebody else wants you to say. So I think the first thing I want to say is that if you're in a supporting role, it's hard. And I don't think, in my experience, people say that often enough. You want to do the best, you want to get it right, and there is no single way to get it right. I can't tell you. The only one thing I can tell you is, don't ignore us, say something.
Hmm.
And if you don't know what to say that. Say, I don't know what to say, but I'm here for you. And if you say I'm here for you, then be there for them. One of the things that I have done some research on and had a sort of more success on is all of the different ways that you can support people. And I think where people go wrong with this is that they tend to immediately draw themselves towards the emotional support or the practical support. And those are really useful, without a doubt. But on top of that, I encourage people to understand there are lots of different forms of support that you can offer people who are coping with any type of loss. One of them, the lesser known ones, is informational support. And I know that you will be often talking about this on your podcast, is, find the person who is good at having that conversation with the professional, whether that professional or expert person is, I don't know, whether it is a health practitioner, but also it might be a lawyer, it might be the accountant, it might be the real estate agent if you have to sell your house. So find the expert people and get that informational support. Another aspect that I think people forget is we crave physical support. And sometimes, I know this from when my mum died in the year 2000, I would turn up at my husband's building site and just stand close to him. There was a physical proximity that my body craved. So there's a sort of physiological need there. And I've certainly over the years had clients who have said, they've told me that they've lost their partner and their best friend came and slept in their bed with them for that first week. So just two examples of the kind of physical support that is required. And then there are other aspects of support which are rarely talked about, such as memory support. You know, sometimes you might not be the person who's going to mow their lawns or give them a hug, but you might be the person who can send them a photo, you know, 2 years down the track, or just when you bump into them in the supermarket, actually say their person's name out loud. I think people are so
Hmm.
fearful of saying their person's name. And, you know, I love hearing Abby's name. I love talking about Abby. I don't get enough opportunities to do so now. So I think that being the memory support is really helpful too. And then the other one I kind of like to tune people into the fact that you can be their long term support, because so many people are under this erroneous, you know, idea that grief lasts a month or a year, whereas we know that, of course, it shapes us forever. And so I love it when people will say to me now something about Abby, or just ask me, you know, how is my grief nowadays? I'm 11 years in, and I don't think about Abby all the time. I certainly don't grieve all the time, but I don't mind being asked about it, and just acknowledging that our lives are changed because of this event, um, forever. And, you know, none of the things I'm talking about, I hope you'll notice, are about being positive. I don't like the word positive, um, despite my initial training being in positive psychology. And I really love your own terminology about walking two roads, because I think that is what we're looking for here, is constructive ways to manage and adapt to whatever is going on. And that word positive, I don't think is very helpful in that sense.
Hmm. I'm so I'm listening so intently because I had like two questions geared up and I lost my train of my thought. But I think it came back to me that it's very clear to me that yeah, or I'm picking up that this resilience is a skill and mindset. You use that word and we use that too, that we should be developing, and in fact is something that is around us right from the start. And we in a way we miss the opportunities to train ourselves and think about those. Even I'm thinking about my young kids and the different ways that we can think about that. But it's sort of a skill and a practice, and we ought not to wait for something tragic to happen before we start to think about these practices. And so I guess my question is, what are some things that people can focus on doing now? Is it just asking themselves those three questions that you talked about that are in your TED talk, or what are some of the most helpful things, that small things that people could do today that can build up their I guess their resilience training, if you will, that muscle in them?
It's such a good question. And I think it is important for listeners to understand that resilience isn't a fixed trait that some people have and others don't. You know, I refer to it as a capacity that resides within us all, and it can be built, and it doesn't just reside within you, but between you as well, because it does come from the ways that we choose to think, act, and be in the micro moments of our days. You know, we're continually making choices about that will have an impact on how we go through life. But beyond that, that internal processing, it is this capacity comes from our ability to connect to others, to ask for support, to cultivate strong supportive relationships that will be there for us in our, tougher times. So actually, probably the most simple two things I would suggest to people beyond those that are in my TED talk that they focus on if you want to build your resilience muscle, as you say. I love that metaphor. One is to just make sure that you really are building this network of strong, supportive relationships. It is so critical for us in our time of need. But of course, you don't go making those relationships at 3 a.m. or once you're sitting there in front of the health professional who's giving you that diagnosis. It is something that we have to work on all the time. And the other is to understand that your ways of thinking, acting, and being are different for each of us. And in my work, I talk about people having a resilience recipe. So to know what's in your recipe, which ways of thinking, acting, and being have enabled you to cope when you've gone through things in the past. And I've heard you guys talk about this in your podcast previously. And in my new book, I do talk about this absolute similar exercise to, I'm sure, that is in your book, and I need to go and find it, which is talking about loss efficacy to, really go back on your life and think about all the times that you've had that have required you to somehow cope and know the ingredients of what helped you then, because what helped you then can help you now. And so all of us need to really have this mastery of knowing immediately that when something happens, what is it? What are our go-tos that work for us? Because personalization is key. And this again, fits with your 7 keys, doesn't it? It's about knowing your style, and customizing your order. It's completely, the research backs this up, that there is no one way to resilience, that we have to know ourselves, what works for us. And it is a continual work on that. Building your resilience muscle is a great metaphor. Just as we don't go to the gym once and expect to be physically fit for life, we have to work on our mental health strategies all the time to really know what works for us.
Hmm. What I mean, one of my favorite things when you gave your talk was actually how you ended it, and you said, I think it was a quote, something like "resilience is within us, but
Mm,
also lies between us." And you talk
mm,
about this, the idea of collective resilience. So,
mm.
can you kind of explain what you meant by that?
Well, I think that is what people, particularly in weird Western cultures, people, because of the individualistic approach to everything, that they think that resilience is this kind of inner trait and inner ability to kind of look after yourself and double down in tough times and be staunch and stoic and all those things. But actually, the science and my clients and practice have really demonstrated to me that yes, there are ways of thinking and acting and being that you can choose as an individual that lie within you. And you can enact those moments in those micro moments of your life, the little choices you make in the everyday. So, yes, resilience is a capacity that lies within you. But beyond that, the standout finding of resilience and well-being science is that nobody goes it well alone. That, other people matter, as the legendary psychologist Chris Peterson once said. So yes, it lies within you, but it also lies between you. That the more connected you are, the better supported you are, the more realistic your conversations can be, the better you are at asking for help and getting the specific help you need, the more resilient you are over the long haul. But also, the earthquakes taught me this collective sense of resilience, that the more you know each other in your communities, that the more willing you are to reach out and ask for help and offer help. There is resilience goes even from the me level to the we level in your smaller groups to the us level
Mm,
across communities. And without a doubt, CN, that is what all of your work and everybody on this podcast are doing together. It is that collective resilience that is at the heart of the waiting room's mission, isn't it? It's like we can do better. And if we all work together to challenge the pathologizing, restrictive, power imbalance model that we inherited, if we all work together to change that, to challenge it, and to empower people, then we are all doing better as societies. So, yeah, totally within you and between you.
Lucy, it has been an incredible joy to chat with you today. Um, is there a question or a last word that you wanted to leave with our listeners about your work, and about all the expertise you have on resilience?
I guess I think that it's just, we've had a lovely time together and it's great to have these conversations, but resilience is an ongoing learning. And so I do so much more on social media and blogs and newsletters nowadays because I truly believe in the principle, the Maori principle from Aotearoa, New Zealand, of ako, which is spelled AKO, which is reciprocal learning. So come and follow me on any of my social platforms where I am at Dr. Lucy Hone. Come and ask me questions. Come and tell me your stories. Come and, sign up for my newsletter because just like you're doing at the waiting room, I think we have such similar, parallel, aligned missions, don't we? That we're trying to help people find their way through these challenging moments in life. But we are building movements, and we can only do it if people sign up and follow and join in the conversation. Because you and I never want to do this work on our own. We want to create collective movements for change. So, yeah, come and follow me, get more tips, and ask me your questions, please.
Thank you so much, Lucy. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for having me, and thank you to all of your listeners for the work they do, the care they show, and listening today.
Thanks for listening. Our workbook, Applying the 7 Keys for Navigating a Life-Changing Diagnosis, is available now at all online bookstores. Visit our website for more details and to access our free resources, event listings, and learn all about our movement. The best way to keep up with us and our work is to join our newsletter list, or better yet, become an ambassador. This episode was produced by Maggie Sivak, myself, Kayla McMillan, Shilpa Jyothi Kumar, Bethany Bachanfuso, and Kathleen Bartlett. Our theme music is Maypole by Ketsa.